They can be located within dry flood-proofed enclosures for non-residential buildings, or they can be elevated or constructed so as to prevent water from entering and accumulating. This here is depicting a backflow preventer. There was a recent local law which amended the plumbing code to make reference to Appendix G. So the plumbing code says whenever you're subject to overflow from the public sewer, you're required to provide a backflow preventer. But this local law changed that to say whenever you're in the special flood hazard area, you are subject to overflow and therefore required to install a backflow preventer. So now it's just making reference to something that ASCE 24 already required, but there it is. So V-Zone, as I mentioned previously, V-Zone has more significant and more stringent construction requirements. There is not a distinction between non-residential and residential. In the V-Zone, you basically have to elevate on piles. So the requirement is that the lowest floor be elevated on adequately anchored piles or columns. This is typical V-Zone construction in New York City. You have the parking underneath and everything's elevated above. So the lowest floor has to be elevated and anchored on piles or columns. And now the differences in the V-Zone, which you're going to see some residential buildings in the V-Zone, you're now measuring, instead when you were measuring your design flood elevation, it was for A-zone construction, residential, you were measuring your design flood elevation from the top of the lowest floor, the walking surface of the lowest floor. But for V-zone construction, now you're measuring from the underside of the lowest horizontal structural member, so that the wave will pass right underneath the building and won't broadside the building and transmit all those forces into the structure. So the main point of elevating on piles is to get all the portions of the building which are perpendicular to the waves up and out. So when you're looking for your design flood elevation, you're determining what your member orientation is. Is it parallel? Is it perpendicular? And that's where you're determining what your design flood elevation is. Now for V-zone type construction, previously I mentioned for A-zone you can have this wet flood-proofed enclosure with solid walls. That's not permitted in the V-zone. ASCE 24 says that you have to have solid breakaway walls. New York City went a bit further and amended ASCE 24 to say that you have to have open lattice type construction underneath. So let's see if we have a picture of that, but it's basically like you'd see under a deck. That open lattice type construction is surrounding the exterior wall so that someone can see right underneath that area and ensure that it hasn't been converted into some habitable space. So it's not permitted to have solid breakaway walls in New York City for V-zone type construction. And there are loading requirements of ASCE 7 so that when a wave of a certain force bangs into the side of this thing, it's going to go careening away. Just keep that in mind. Flood-resistant materials and finishes utilized below the design flood elevation. And the utilities, obviously, they have to be elevated, or they are constructed so as to resist wave action and prevent water from entering and accumulating. Here's the design. So all the tables, there's all these different tables for determining the design flood elevation based on what you're looking for. For utilities, it's table 7-1. For lowest floor, it's 2-1. For horizontal structural member, it's 4-1. In the V-zone, there are certain prohibitions. Development, including land disturbing activities, is seaward of the reach of mean high tide is prohibited. So you can't put a building out in the water. It's basically prohibited if you're in a V-zone. So if you're in broad channel and you have these buildings that are on pilings and they're in, they're going to completely replace it, that would be an issue. That would take a little bit more looking at. So here's the typical flood insurance rate map. You can see the different special flood hazard area types. You have the AE zones And then right beneath that, it shows you the base flood elevation in parentheses. This is the old maps. This is the map from September 5th of 2007. And all of the datums, all the BFEs on here are referring to NGVD of 1929. There's a big difference between the datums. I can't accentuate that enough, that you have to make sure you're looking at the right datums. So this is the old map. I think I'm going to, how am I doing for time?
You got 10 minutes to go.
Okay.
Can I just suggest one topic I want to make sure you cover is substantial damage?
Yep.
Because you've been talking mostly about standards for new construction.
Sure.
They're working mostly on retrofits.
Okay. So this is substantial damage and substantial improvement. So, if a building is substantially damaged, that means there's a definition for that in our building code. So a building has a certain market value, right? And it's the market value of the building, not the building and the land. I think I have Department of Finance assessment roll here. So here is a screenshot of the Department of Finance's assessment roll for a building in Broad Channel, and you can see that it's got the land value and then the total value, but you're interested in the market value of the structure itself. So there's a rule, 1 RCNY 3606 1 RCNY 360601, and it tells you exactly how to calculate market value of building, right? And so you go to the Department of Finance assessment roll, and you can determine based on, it's a ratio. You know the total value, you know the land value, so somehow you can figure out the market value of the structure, right? But the thing is, the Department of Finance's assessment roll is really low. So if someone does not want to be substantially improved, they have two options. They can either use the Department of Finance's assessment roll, which we talked about, or they can use a realtor's appraisal to determine the market value of the structure. So you determine the market value of the structure, and then you have to determine what the scope of the work is. What are we doing? So when you divide the cost of the work by the market value of the structure, if it equals or exceeds 50%, then there are significant requirements that are triggered. This building is now deemed substantially damaged, or in the case of an alteration to a building in the flood zone, that's maybe it wasn't damaged, but you just want to do something interesting to it, it could become substantially improved. And what that is going to trigger is full compliance with Appendix G like a new building. So that's why it's important to understand what the requirements are for new buildings, because they would apply to a substantially improved or a substantially damaged building. So these are all the things that are included in the calculation of repair costs, okay? Now, whenever an application is filed with the Department of Buildings, if it exceeds $40,000, the Department of Buildings is going to require cost calculations to substantiate whether the building is substantially improved or not, or substantially damaged or not. And based on those calculations, we'll determine what the requirements are. So these are the type of things that could be excluded. So you can exclude plan specifications, survey costs, permit fees. This is all contained in the FEMA's Substantial Improvement, Substantial and Damage Desk Reference Guide. So as I mentioned, there's two acceptable methods for determining market value, the assessment roll option and the appraisal option. Here's a quick screenshot of the Department of Finance's assessment roll for a building. This is how you can get just a sniff test to determine if the building is substantially damaged or not.
Excuse me, Joe.
Yep.
Is that, they still implementing pre-Sandy costs and appraisals?
For a substantial damage determination, it would be pre-storm market value. For a substantial improvement calculation, it would be the market value of the building now.
Okay.
So this is that document that I spoke to you about.
I'm sorry, could you just repeat what you just said about the pre-storm value?
So if you're determining if a building was substantially damaged, basically you want to determine how much it costs to bring this building exactly back to the condition it was in the day before the storm. So that would be determining, you have to go to the assessment roll at the time before the storm. If someone comes to the department and says, I want to convert this, two-family into a three-family building, we wouldn't say, present us the calculations for market value before Hurricane Sandy. We would say, what is the market value of this building right now? and what is the cost of construction proposed to determine if the building is to be substantially improved. Follow me?
Maybe.
We can talk offline.
Yeah.
Okay, so if a building's not substantially damaged and it will not be substantially improved, then basically you're allowed to put everything back the way it was. You don't have to, you can't increase the degree of noncompliance, but you can put light fixtures and equipment back where it was before. You're not prohibited from, if the furnace was destroyed, you can put the furnace back. If there were a certain type of materials on the floor and the wall, you can put those materials back, provided you're not substantially improved and provided you weren't substantially damaged. And that's that.
I have a question. Is this all calculated in one intervention, or let's say that someone does something to their home today and do more work in 6 months? Are those two different calculations, or do they sum to get to 50%?
So the way the substantial improvement cost is calculated, you basically take a snapshot of all of the work that's ongoing with the property at the time that an application is filed. So suppose you have 4 open applications for work that wasn't signed off. You have electrical work that's still open. You have an alteration that was never closed out. All of that has to be included in the calculation until those jobs are closed out. So this is kind of an operational issue, but all the work, generally speaking, depending how far back the application goes, but generally speaking, we're looking at all the open applications and it's cumulative. So if you had an alteration to a building and then you signed off that work, then theoretically you could start the calculation anew.
So
Yes.
if somebody was damaged and they did the repairs, and then they decided later on they want to improve the building, do the repairs and the improvement go back on to the...
Provided all that work is signed off,
Yeah.
then it wouldn't be
It
included.
would be separate.
It has to be signed off. The work has to be completed, right? Yes?
October 1st, the 2014 building code takes effect. Is there a big difference from 08 to 14 in the Appendix G?
There are a lot of differences.
It's only a month and a half away.
Yeah, so there are, as far as small residential buildings are concerned, the coastal A zone requirements will be effective, but they won't be effective until we adopt the preliminary flood insurance rate maps. Right now, we've adopted the preliminary flood insurance rate maps by rule, but we have to, when the preliminary flood insurance rate maps become effective sometime in 2016, we're mandated by our ordinance to adopt those pretty much immediately. Once all of the map challenges have been addressed, we will adopt the 2016 preliminary effective firms. And once we do that, the way Appendix G is written, the coastal A zone requirements are going to kick in. So even though if you look in October, if you have a new building October 2nd of 2014, you file it with us, and you'll see that there's all these coastal A zone requirements. You have to elevate like you're on piles, like you're in the V zone, or you have to have stem wall type construction. That's not going to be actually mandated until we adopt those maps. Does that make sense?
I guess I'll see.
Yeah, you got to read the definition of coastal A zone. You'll see that it's convoluted and perfect. Yes, sir.
You mentioned a building being crossed by a flood zone. Is there a difference between 2 flood zones crossing the site and not touching the building versus touching the building?
So if a site is in the flood zone but the building is not, then the building is not subject to the requirements. However, if you were to have a horizontal enlargement and then encroach into this flood zone, then you'd be required to comply. If your building, if your site has V zone in it and then also A zone, but the building is strictly in the A zone, then the A zone requirements are applicable. So if you look into Appendix G, the section is basically multiple flood zones. That's the section, and it's specific to the building itself. Any other questions? Yes?
might not apply to you, but if you have a building that is not going to be substantially changed, but is in the flood zone and it's not realistic to ever raise it because let's say it's bearing wall masonry, would the flood insurance rates still go up a lot, or are they going to be?
So there was this Biggert Waters Act, the Insurance Reform Act, which is basically doing away with all the subsidies related to pre-firm construction. I don't know if that's going to be watered down in the future. There's a lot of politics behind it. So what we know now is that basically the pre-firm subsidies, which would have said, okay, you have a basement and all your utilities are at risk, and we're still going to offer you a flood insurance policy at $2,300, say. That's going to go away. And the way flood insurance is rated is all, for residential construction, it's all relative to the elevation of the lowest floor. So the higher the lowest floor is relative to the base flood elevation, that will impact your insurance rates. So if it's not feasible to elevate, then yes, the insurance rates likely will go up.
May I, the insurance rates will force people out of their homes, literally. Right now, after Biggert Waters, they passed another bill, Congress did, because Maxine Waters, who passed that first one, as soon as it passed after Sandy, freaked out because they realized that, well, someone on Staten Island already got a $29,000 flood insurance bill. It'll be like a couple grand a month if you can't elevate and get out of the floodplain. So they realized that this is going to force more people out of their homes than the mortgage debacle has. So they passed another bill that is going to allow it to come in incrementally over the next 4 years, but at the end of that 4 years, people are going to have to move.
Yeah, this is a bigger public policy problem than we can solve in this room. But
Just want to put it out there.
one of the benefits
It's a fiasco.
of the help desk is documenting the scope and extent of conditions like that that can't be addressed, under current laws and regulations to inform the city's effort to reform that policy. Take it away.
All right, so I'm sure you guys haven't heard enough yet, so I'm gonna throw some more at you. Let's see. Try to make this presentation as visual as possible, but of course the first slide is not that way. There's a lot of background. Right after the storm, the mayor issued an executive order, which, I'm going to be talking about the zoning regulations that are basically in response to the building code requirements that Joe just talked about. To understand where we are right now, it's important to understand that immediately following the storm, the mayor issued his executive order, which suspended zoning regulations in order to allow people to elevate their homes, in order to allow immediate rebuilding. And following that, the city took as quickly as they could and implemented a new text amendment to our zoning resolution that codified the executive order, but also hopefully went a step further in addressing some of these very odd circumstances. Most of our buildings, as Joe mentioned, were built prior to 1983. They're in no way made for flood zones at all. So, and unfortunately, most of the most vulnerable building stock is actually in the flood zone. So, we're in New York City have a unique challenge. So we tried to find as many zoning solutions that we could in order to make this easier. It, of course, is never easy. It's important to know that where these zoning provisions are applicable is within the 100-year flood zone. We will be coming at some point later in the future, hopefully as soon as possible, with additional changes that hopefully will address people that are in the 500-year flood zone. And if you do hear a question, or if you find properties of people that are in the 500-year flood zone, we would love to hear about them and what their issues are, because we do want to be able to address sea level rise in the future and other issues. But for now, our zoning, I'll call them relaxations or additional incentives, whatever you want to call them, are only applicable in the 100-year flood zone. Not to go too much into building code stuff, but just to add a little more visuals to it. Most of the homes that you're going to be dealing with are on the left side, which are residential buildings. They have no option but to elevate and wet flood proof below what Joe referred to as a design flood elevation. If you do have a non-residential building or a mixed use, you have the two options, which is to elevate and wet floodproof, or to actually dry floodproof. And as Joe mentioned, dry floodproofing can be expensive and require significant engineering. There's an important distinction between the zoning resolution and building code. Right now, they're currently the same. We use the term FRCE. It is basically the equivalent of design flood elevation. It is our term for flood-resistant construction elevation. There's a complicated story behind it, but in the end, it means that you're using the most restrictive flood map, whether it's the old maps or the new ones. There are some areas in the Bronx that actually have, in the new maps, lesser requirements. So you have to use the most restrictive, and that's what's going to incorporate freeboard. So this visual was at the time of the amendment, which we had previous maps, we had the latest maps, we had freeboard, it all kind of piles up on top of each other. But for zoning terms, we use FRCE. For you guys, it's really the equivalent of DFE, design flood elevation. So in this new world that we live in, we had to identify what the main issues were with the zoning resolution, understanding that the FEMA requirements that existed since 1983, as well as the new freeboard requirements that the city recently adopted, we had 6 different main areas that we needed to address, or that we thought were important to address. Height, there's a lot of buildings that are now going to be much taller than they were, and zoning needs to be able to allow that to happen. In a lot of cases, getting access to these new elevated buildings is going to be extremely difficult. So what ways can we make that easier? Mechanical systems is kind of the low-hanging fruit of retrofitting, which is they're the first thing that you should always do to get above the flood levels. They allow you to return to your home quicker. So we want to be able to make that as easy as possible. In some cases, we have parking below the flood level, or I'm sorry, below grade, which is a no-no according to Appendix G. And then from the city's planning standpoint, okay, how is the ground floor being used? How is this going to affect our streetscape? How can we ensure the vitality of New York City as a pedestrian and walkable oriented place? So I won't go too much. I mean, the way the zoning resolution measures height is in 2 different ways, whether it's a base plane or the sky exposure plane. In the flood zone, it's important to note that we changed it to measure everything from the flood-resistant construction elevation. So if a height limit in a zoning district was previously 35 feet, measured from wherever, it is now the FRCE. So this will allow people to maintain the similar size home they had before, but elevated to the required level by the building code. So that's actually a huge thing. It's covered in one slide, but it's relatively simple. As Joe mentioned, below the FRCE, just like in the building code, the zoning code is referring to the building code and saying you can only have parking, storage, or access. Okay, for access, there's a couple, and you might run into it. Rockaways definitely has a couple of cases, Staten Island for sure, where we have existing buildings that are completely non-compliant. They're built in 1910, 1920, 1950. They don't comply with any of the either building code or zoning code provisions. But we don't want to prevent them from elevating. We want everyone to be able to elevate. So in some cases, they're not going to have adequate front yard space in order to elevate. But in the same time, they might not also have any rear yard space to move back into, or at least not legally. So what we've done with the zoning resolution is to allow you to actually move your home back into a rear yard. Sorry, is this, I'm trying to stop this from happening. You can actually move your home into a rear yard in order to create a compliant front yard. We did this to allow you to put a stair, a lift, whatever you need to do in order to access the building. Down. Okay. There are some limitations. Like I said, it's up to your compliant front yard, whether it be 10, 15 feet, and you can't go any less than 4 feet in the rear yard, which is pretty small. Normally a rear yard is required to be 30 feet, so there's quite a bit of room here to move back. In some cases, it may not be feasible for you to actually move the building back, whether it be structural, site limitations, whatever. Another option is to actually enter from underneath the house. In some cases, homes may be non-compliant in floor area, which is a zoning term, but they might be larger than what would normally be allowed. We're exempting any of that additional space from counting because we just want you to be able to get into your house. This doesn't probably apply to most of, this is more of a new construction commercial building thing, but in larger buildings, non-single and two-family homes, also exempted that circulation space from counting towards your floor area. As Joe mentioned, there's the possibility of dry flood proofing. We've allowed, normally there's only certain things that are allowed in required yards, courts, other open areas. We're saying if you need to put flood panels in a yard, go do it. Again, not in a residential area, completely residential building, but if you have a non-residential building, you can do this. But maybe more importantly for this crew is a lift. We have a lot of aging communities along the waterfront. I mean, I wouldn't even mind a lift in my front yard. The idea is we would like to encourage, or at least allow these people that may have difficulty getting up this. In some cases, we're looking at elevations with up to 12 feet high. Could be difficult for even a person that isn't necessarily handicapped, just elderly. So we've expanded the ability to put a lift in a number of areas. So front yards, side yards, rear yards, open areas, etc., open space. Like I said, mechanical systems are that sort of first step. They're the easiest thing to do. However, in some cases you might not have and I'm going to use legal, but according to the zoning resolution, legal place to put it. Normally they're not allowed in required yards, and we've changed that to say, okay, as long as you place them close to the building, they're screened from view, they're at least 5 feet away from the neighbors, you can place them in a required yard. This one's showing the basic requirements. Just as a side note, this entire presentation is on our website, along with some frequently asked questions. We have a climate resilience page, so anything you want to go back, the specifics are in each of the slides. So I won't go over all the numbers, but if you want to know, and you can use that as a resource when you're talking with the clients, citizens, I don't know the right term. Another option, which probably isn't as plausible as we would like it to be, but if you had a detached garage in your rear yard, you can place it on the roof or within a pitched roof. For any building that's not single or two family, it's a little bit stricter, but we did allow them to place these mechanical equipment in the rear yard. Again, they have to be raised to the flood elevation. And for the most part, all these provisions require you, like I said, to use the most restrictive maps and that your home complies with flood-resistant construction standards. But the mechanical equipment is one of those things that we just allow you to do regardless. As long as your mechanical equipment is put to the right height, elevated, then the rest of your building may not comply, but we understand that this is an important first step. In some cases, there are limitations for relocating mechanical equipment inside the home, but if you are able to do it, we're going to exempt that from floor area as well. This is again more for larger buildings, but there's increases in the size of bulkheads. I don't think you really need to deal with this. For existing buildings, you could go taller. For parking, we have, this is applicable in a lot of areas in Brooklyn. I don't know, in Queens, probably not so much. Maybe, and Staten Island, there's actually quite a bit too, I think. But Brooklyn for sure, Canarsie has a lot of situations where the driveway is angled down into a below-grade parking garage, or just single-family home garage. We would like to allow these people, and this is an example of a building that can't necessarily be elevated because it's attached with another building. We want to still allow them to be as compliant as possible. So the compliant solution is to fill in that below-grade space, at least to the surrounding grade. Now that would normally make you non-compliant for parking for zoning resolution purposes, but we're going to say, hey, we'd rather you have a more resilient building and maybe one less parking space. So we're going to ask you to either put it in your front yard, put it in your side yard, and you know what, if you can't put it anywhere, you can just get rid of it. So whatever we can do. Everything within this, our changes were meant to allow people to make a more resilient building and get back what they had. We weren't trying to punish anyone, and we were trying to be as flexible as possible, understanding that this is a rough time. And then there are certain situations where people didn't have parking before, and they might now be able to because they have elevated their home 12 feet in the air and now have all this space underneath that can only be used for parking, storage, and access. but the zoning resolution has pretty strict curb cut and parking location rules. So in order to allow these people to utilize the underside of their homes, we've relaxed a lot of those curb cut spacing the curb cut spacing requirements, and the location, they still can't be wider than they normally are, but that's not as important. Okay, ground floor use. In many cases, and this, someone had asked a question about, there's a lot of buildings where we're not going to be able to elevate. They're just attached, they're brick, they're whatever they are. FEMA thinks the elevating is going to solve all of our problems, but in New York City, things are a little bit different. Well, we've tried to allow, in many ways as possible, for you to, or I don't like the term abandon, but abandon the ground floor and relocate whatever ground floor use you had to an upper story. This isn't the most feasible at all times. It can be expensive. You may have to reinforce the structure if you're adding onto the top, but if you have the means, then go for it. And what we'll do is allow you to exempt that entire ground floor from floor area. This building is showing, this might be the fully built out, what zoning would allow building on your left. And the flood level may not make it not count as far as cellar and basement, and I don't know how much people know about the distinction. Depending on where the level of the flood is going to land is going to determine whether it counts as floor area or not. It's probably a little bit too complicated, but the idea being, if you want to abandon the ground floor, you can exempt it from floor area wherever the flood level lands. So if you're talking with someone with a row house and the flood level is like 3 or 4 feet above, we are going to allow them to abandon that ground floor, wet flood proof it, and relocate all of that floor area to either an addition in the rear, addition on the top, addition on the front if they have it, wherever they can place it. We're again trying to make people whole and allow them to be more resilient. This is out of order, but so that's basically what's shown on the left here, which is unfortunately can have a really negative streetscape implication because you're blocking up the ground floor and putting flood vents. But we have another option in lower density districts if you have a commercial use at the ground level, that you can dry flood proof that space, and in order to keep the space on the ground, you actually get a bonus, or you get to replace that floor area that you dry flood proofed. I don't know how much this might come up in Red Hook, nowhere else, probably parts of Rockaways. If you have a small business owner, they can actually, in order to offset the cost of the dry flood proofing, which can be expensive, and to encourage them to keep that business and to keep the space as commercial, they can actually add on additional space at the top. And then, I'm an urban designer, so this is my favorite part of it. We wanted to address some of the inherent problems with elevating homes, the disconnection from the street, what could possibly be an unattractive street front, because New York City is, well, I like to think of it as very vital at the sidewalk level. So we've instituted a series of, everyone tells me streetscape mitigation is not the right term. Streetscape enhancements is going to be the rebranded terminology for it, which basically takes what you see on the left and hopefully pretties it up a little bit. And we think hopefully it activates, keeps eyes on the street, safety, and a more attractive street front. So what we've done is provided in cases where this is only applicable if you have to raise your house more than 5 feet above the ground. And then you have an option of picking one of these many, well, 5 options that, don't worry Susan, we're working on some more. These options in order to hopefully mitigate some of the impacts of this elevation. So you can do planting, a simple stair turn in order to break up the kind of, the straight run of stairs. Whether you do an enclosed porch or a roof porch, and you can even raise the yard, though that can be expensive at times. And currently not allowed by the zoning resolution, but we've allowed it in flood zones in order to give some more flexibility. Once you're 9 feet or more, you actually have to pick 2. And then the roof porch will count as 2. We think that's one of the better options. It really maintains some presence on the street, breaks up the massing of the home a little bit as it comes down. Porches are also allowed to encroach into a front yard, which normally they're not. So in the flood zone, you get all these freebies. There's some covered porch options. You could do a balcony above it. Just many options. I'll breeze through these, which are the multifamily requirements. Most likely only going to apply to new construction. We wanted to prevent big stairs and ramps from being out in front of the building, and where we could require plantings based on how high you have to elevate. One, we call this the streetscape incentives part of the presentation. And this is where there's a lot of situations you're going to find where a home needs to be elevated kind of high, but not really high enough to use the space underneath. So I wanted to give the homeowner the ability to actually elevate just a little bit more in order to allow parking underneath, storage, whatever it is. So if you have to elevate between 6 and 9 feet, we're actually going to allow you to elevate, as far as height requirements, to 9 feet in order to allow a usable underside. Again, that's going to kick in the 2 streetscape requirements, but we think it's an important aspect of also activating the ground floor and allowing homeowners to use that space. In multifamily buildings, this is the result of what could happen if a multifamily building is elevated. You have a 300-foot long ramp and a huge stair. So we want to encourage any multifamily building that's between 5 and 10 feet flood-resistant construction elevation or design flood elevation to actually go to 10 feet and then create a ground floor lobby space that has circulation within it, so that isn't facing the street. Well, we think it's that lobby has to be of a certain width, there has to be plantings, you have to screen parking. We think it's a better solution. And then for commercial buildings, larger buildings, we allow a similar type thing. You can raise up a little bit more, but we're going to ask you to do transparency. All right, getting towards the end, don't worry. An important thing that you might run into a lot of is if someone's house was destroyed and it was demolished, or it's still damaged and it's sitting there, normally the building code only allows you to replace what you had for 2 years from that time that it was damaged or destroyed or demolished. We've extended that significantly. We've extended it, normally it's 2 years from the time that the house was demolished. We're going to say 10 years from the adoption of the new firms, you can put back what you had. So we're looking at new firms in end of 2016. We're going to give you until 2026 to put back what you had. And we did that to err on the side of, just complete caution. In New Orleans, there were homes that weren't built up to 8 years after the storm. So we wanted to at least, we don't want people to be concerned that they're not going to be able to get what they had back.
I'm sorry, Dakota, that was said for 1 and 2 families, so not for...
Yeah, for 1 and 2 family homes. And it's really only important if your house was non-compliant, because you can always rebuild something there, but if you want to put back something that wasn't necessarily built to the zoning resolution, then this is what would be applicable. In the case that you have a non-conforming use or you're a non-compliant building, non-compliant building other than a single or 2 family home, you have up to a year after the adoption of the firms to rebuild what you had. So that's it's most likely going to be BPA in 2017, you have till 2018 to put it back. So, and then you can continue construction for however long, you just have to submit a building permit. So trying to be as flexible as possible with that. And then what you're going to find is that most people's houses are actually non-compliant. So many of them were built prior to the storm, it could be really anything, whether it's height, yards, size, whatever it is. We've tried to write the rules as general as possible to say, whatever you have right now, we're going to allow you to put it up to the flood elevation. You can create new non-compliances, which is basically never allowed ever. You can increase the degree of non-compliance, you can create new ones, you can do whatever you need to do in order to bring your building up to the right level. And I think a lot of people might be confused about that, and it'd be really important to know, and if you have questions about this, please ask me. In the V zone, we'll allow you to go to the lowest structural member, in A zones to the lowest floor, even if your height then becomes non-compliant. We just want you to elevate.
That's substantially down.
Yes. No, I think
Anyone can.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's any, yeah. I should check on that, but I'm pretty sure it's everyone. We should check. That's an important note. And then the last thing I have is, in case none of these provisions really provide the solution that you need, we have provided a special permit before the Board of Standards and Appeals that will allow you to waive any bulk requirement of the zoning resolution except floor area. So you can't make your building bigger than it was. But if you need any kind of relaxation, height, setback, yard, location of something, any of it, you can go before the BSA for a special permit. All you need to prove is that in order to comply with flood resistant construction standards, you need to do this, and we will, the BSA will consider it and hopefully approve it. We have a number of projects that of registered build-it-back people that are going to have to go through this process because their homes are either on a lot that is very narrow, their existing home was too big, or any number of things, and they're going to need special permits to replace it. There's a lot of those that will happen, but that's also available to any homeowner, even if they're not registered with the Build-It-Back program. And we'll find out about the substantial damage thing and get back to you. But how am I on time? That's it. Any questions?
What's your website?
It's nyc.gov/planning, and then I believe there's just a main climate resilience link on the front. We have a lot of information about climate resilience, but
You should be able to go to nyc.gov/resilient neighborhoods, and it will take you directly to the project page.
But not.
so flood resilient zoning is right on the front page here, as well as we have a number of other pages, as Melissa was saying, the Resilient Neighborhoods Initiative. But you can view the presentation. There's some frequently asked questions that I think are pretty decent, although the Resilient Neighborhoods probably have a more complete at this point, as well as a number of links to the FEMA Region 2 website that Joe was talking about, DOB information about rebuilding, and then the Recovery Office's website. So, if you have any questions. Yep.
So you determine who is eligible for this based on whether they're in a flood zone or not? So if a building's in a zone X, they don't get any of this relief?
Currently, if you are within a 500-year flood zone or the zone X, you are not able to use this special provisions, unfortunately. Like I said, we were going through, basically, this was an emergency measure. We did it very quickly. We refer to it as round 1. We're currently working on round 2, which we would like to introduce possible options. We don't know how far we're going to be able to go within the 500-year flood zone, but in order to address climate change, sea level rise, just smart rebuilding, we would like to at least allow some mechanical relaxations. Hopefully we can allow some height, but that's all being worked on currently.
And both the old maps and the new maps are in play for determining.
We require that you use the most restrictive of the two, which is now in line with the local law. So regardless, in building code and zoning resolution, you need to use the most restrictive of either of those maps.
One complication about using the 500-year flood zone is that FEMA doesn't have base flood elevations for the 500-year flood zone, so part of...
That's one of the main difficulties, is that we can't just say allow people within the 500-year flood zone to build to the flood level, because FEMA doesn't provide that information. So we know that they are susceptible to floods in a 500-year flood, however, we don't know to what height those floods will be.
Well, you could get a neighborhood where sort of one side of the street is all jacked up a story, and then across the street, it's really not in that flood zone.
Yep.
They're all going to be...
We absolutely understand and are working on trying to figure out a way to, we're hopefully going to be working with FEMA in order to get them to actually map the 500-year flood elevations, but it's a work in progress. Any other questions?
We're ahead of schedule and the pizza has arrived.
Those are the best words you've ever said. Is existing homes, or if they had to be substantially damaged, could be elevated. I guess my presentation is closed. But as long as your home was existing on October 28th, the day before Hurricane Sandy, you can elevate to the flood-resistant construction elevation, create whatever new non-compliance you have to in order to bring your lowest level to the flood level. So it doesn't matter if you're substantially damaged or not. It just has to, your house had to exist prior to the storm in order to do that.
Thanks, Dakota. Dakota, also, you didn't introduce yourself at the beginning of your presentation, so I just want to introduce you. Dakota Hendon is an urban designer and city planner here at the department and was instrumental in all of that work you just saw. It's from Miami. Right? Well, not from Miami, but brought all of your Miami knowledge to us. Okay. Also, while I'm getting started here, just a quick survey of who's in the audience tonight. Who here is an architect? Okay. Are engineers in the audience? That's good. Are there architecture students and graduate architects, like architects in training? What are some of the other, anybody else, something else that they want to? Planners, architects. Okay. No journalists? Good. How do we go to the screen? Zoom. Control up. Okay, thanks. All right. Eating my time here. Okay, so one of the resources that you can use to prepare for the Sandy Help Desk is a report that we actually started a few years ago at the Department of City Planning when it became apparent that we would have to start thinking about how the city would adapt to climate change. As an outgrowth, more or less, of the Mayor Bloomberg's 2007 Plan NYC, started to take seriously this idea that buildings would have to be elevated to higher flood elevations, and that would really affect the way we use our buildings, our streets, our neighborhoods. So we started to study this, and we produced this Designing for Risk report. And so the impetus for the report was that we were integrating new freeboard requirements. So we all got introduced to this new term. What is freeboard, and why does it matter? Freeboard is basically this, Joe mentioned it earlier in his presentation, but it's a factor of safety above the base flood elevation to account for uncertainty. And that's pretty much everything that we're trying to do here, is design for uncertainty so that we can start to be better prepared for different eventualities. But this uncertainty affects everything. It affects our regulations, it affects the way that we design, and it certainly affects the way that we can afford to live in the flood zone. So this report's useful because it visualizes a lot of that information that you heard earlier about the different types of zones. This is a diagram that Amy Jenny painstakingly made to describe freeboard in different building occupancy class. This was a very difficult diagram to make. And this is another great one that you made. It's showing the A and B zone requirements. So if you want Appendix G boiled down in very simple graphic language, I would refer you to this report. One of this acronym here, this is actually what would Jane Jacobs do? So the way that we've been framing the conversation about how to design the flood zone is really premised with the idea that we want to preserve the character of our neighborhoods and find ways to make buildings more safe at the same time making our neighborhoods more livable. So to do this, we've been working closely with advocates and architects just like you. We've had a number of charrettes at the Center for Architecture and other locations to discuss the flood resilient requirements, feeding that back into code. I would say that this Sandy Help Desk is very much in that same spirit. I think that we can look forward to that same collaboration. And we've been thinking about the different parameters that really guide what you can and can't do in terms of designing the flood zones. So there's a lot more you can do when the building's low, for instance, and there's a lot more that you can do when the building is further away. But in our urban conditions, we have very constrained sites. We have a lot of unique building types that, attach very or very close to one another. And we have incredible density throughout the city, even in the flood zones, even in the so-called lower density districts. And there's an incredible diversity of different building types and diversity of programs and uses on the first floor of buildings. So to deal with all this, and with close collaboration of the design community, we developed some simple principles for designing and flood risk. You know, we didn't want to start by just recommending, elevate buildings or do one simple answer that might apply to many buildings. We think it's important to start first with some principles that really we arrived at through some consensus and conversation. They might be obvious, they're also important to keep in mind. So one thing is that as buildings elevate, obviously there's a visual connectivity between the street, the pedestrian on the street, and the first floor of the building that's really important to the comfort and safety of the pedestrian environment. And we think that that's something that you should just keep in mind whenever you're looking at these flood elevations. Also, when buildings get raised above the, outside of the plate, when the first floor goes above the area that you immediately see, it's important to think about how that area is designed. I've seen a lot of early plans for elevations that are just basically taking the house, lifting it up, and then everything underneath is just whatever utilitarian thing that it needs to be. But that should not be the case. In fact, the place that people see and experience should be the place that would probably start with the design for that area. Inviting access as buildings go up in the air, we want to make sure that that approach from the street to the entrance of the building is still inviting, and inviting for everybody, even people with mobility impairment. So that's an important thing to keep in mind always, to make the access to buildings welcoming and equitable. And then finally, the neighborhoods in the flood zone are going to change. The look of them, the feel of them, they will change over time. The Build It Back program, for instance, is going to be elevating thousands of houses, like literally thousands of houses. And on some streets, it might be every house on the street will be elevated. And that's hopefully if Build It Back gets to them all. But over time, the insurance is going to create enormous economic pressure for the other houses to elevate. And so neighborhoods are going to change. The way we use our streets and buildings is going to dramatically alter. But we need to find ways to respect the character of the place and find elements of the architecture, whether it's the material or the massing or the fenestration patterns that might speak to the quality of the neighborhood before, or just whatever it is that's particular to that area. I think some of these slides don't capture the particular character of the Rockaways. For instance, in the Rockaways, the neighborhood's defined by like a beach bungalow kind of and so you would try to find ways to maintain that scale and the character of the beach bungalow kind of community. So we put that report together. It's been foundational to some work that you'll see from Jesse in the future. And then I just want to use another 5 minutes. Do I still have 5 minutes, Joe?
Yes.
Okay, great. And this, usually we end that presentation by just saying that as we help people recover from Sandy and get ready for the next storm, we obviously, individuals and the city at large has experienced enormous loss and a loss of value over time. But we should really seize this opportunity to create new value and new innovation and try to make things better for the future. Not just safer, but better in every way that we can. So now I want to show you, I have exactly 5 minutes to show you something that Shiva and I put together this morning to walk through how you might actually provide this service that we've been talking about in the Sandy HelpDesk. So the first thing is, Carolyn showed you earlier the new flood map interface that she's been working on, but this is the Region 2 coastal flood map, which gives you both the current flood elevation, and it's a little clunky to use, so you kind of have to know to put in the elevation and then to scroll down to see the base flood elevation, the zone. This has something that's very important, which is the local grade elevation. Joe mentioned that earlier, local area grade that defines the elevation of the building. It also has the old flood zone, which In most cases, you don't really need to know because the new map is more strict and probably the one that you have to look at more. So also you should become familiar with some of the databases available in the city that pull up property information. This is Oasis. This can give you, I just typed in the same address, I pulled up the lot area, the age of the buildings, the number of floors, and so forth. And you can use that information along with Google Street View to get a visual of the house, and along with the digital tax maps that are available through the city. Print out a tax map, print out the ABFEs, get that information together, and then you can basically draw, in conversation with the homeowner or the property owner, you can sketch out the floor plan on top of the tax maps, just draw the elevation from street view, and then very importantly, draw the flood elevation across where it is in relation, not to the ground, but to the sea level, right? So it's very important to know the local area grade. So you draw the local area grade, and then in this case, it's about 4 feet above sea level, and then the flood elevation 11 feet above that, and then with freeboard 2 feet beyond that. So these people, in effect, have to elevate not have to, if they are substantially damaged, I should say, and they wanted to, and they were required to come into compliance with code, they would elevate 9 feet above ground, or if they so choose to do that in order to benefit from the preferred insurance rates. And then the next step would be to talk through resilience alternatives with them. So these two that I'm showing here are the full compliance, but I think that there's a greater suite of things that would be available to them, like elevating mechanical equipment, or making discrete, what we're calling discrete mitigations or resilience measures like backflow preventers. But in this case, we assume that they're substantially damaged and that they would have to elevate their house. So what does that mean for this particular house? Well, you would have to elevate the house, put it on, this actually happens to be in the coastal A zone, so it would have to be elevated on an open foundation system. You would have to fill in the basement. You would replace, in this case, it's R41 zoning, so you could actually, on this lot, because it happens to be a big lot, I believe you could replace the basement unit that was actually in this house. In every situation, it's going to be a different set of constraints and possibilities, and you just have to work through it with the client. And we did an alternative, which was that actually, because of the width of the lot, you could actually do a lateral expansion. So I think it's important to work through a few alternatives with people. Now again, this is substantially damaged, and I think there's an important distinction that most people, not most people, but a lot of people will not be substantially damaged and will not be ready to do this scope of work. So you would just have to work through in conversation with people what their possibilities are. And I've actually personally been doing this with a lot of build-back applicants and other people through the last few months, and I found that it's very helpful to just draw with people, even if it's a crude sketch, and just talk through the issues while drawing the existing information. You see this whole kind of tension that surrounds this whole subject lifted when people actually see this information visualized. So that concludes. Handing it over to Jesse Levin. Jesse's been working on the hazard mitigation plan. It's a document that the city city planning is putting together with the Office of Emergency Management. And do you want to describe? I was going to describe it.
Sure. Go ahead. You're
all right. Well, you pull up your presentation.
Yeah.
So, as part of the hazard mitigation plan, Jesse's writing an appendix to this document, which is basically a flood manual for how to retrofit buildings in the flood zone. And it's coming out in September, and we've been reviewing it with all the city agencies and FEMA and others, and we think that this is the first document that really starts to give guidance for specifically urban building types becoming more resilient. Most of the existing FEMA guidance is for single-family detached homes in lower density areas. So,
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thanks. Wondering what to do. Just a little background. I'm an architect, and and so I'm coming at this from the perspective of actual design and building. Like Thad said, the design manual for retrofitting buildings for flood risk is part of the hazard mitigation plan, so it's looking at mitigation strategies. And what we've done is we have brought together everything that has been presented to you thus far tonight and looked at all of those factors in actual buildings, so these case studies. So looking at the flood zone, looking at Appendix G, looking at zoning, looking at alternative ways of or mitigation strategies that do not necessarily comply with Appendix G if you're not substantially improved, and also looking at NFIP. So these case studies, the way that they're laid out in the manual is we have fully modeled the buildings as though that they were substantially damaged or improved, and they're completely complying with NFIP. And NFIP has some regulations that aren't really applicable to New York City, the urban fabric. And so these case studies are pointing out ways that we need to re-look or restructure NFIP. So just keep that in mind when we're going through these case studies. So we have 6 building types, and we have 10 case studies. 7 of the case studies are purely residential, and 3 of the case studies are mixed use. We're looking at both of those because, as Joe touched upon in his presentation, you can only wet flood-proof residential, but you can dry flood-proof commercial, and that makes a big difference in terms of your mitigation strategies. So I am just going to briefly take you through 4 of the case studies. So here we are at the smallest building scale, which is what we call the bungalow, which is a detached wood frame building that is on a foundation on grade, or no foundation at all, just sitting on blocks. Very, very vulnerable building type. A lot of the buildings that were damaged during Sandy were of this typology. And the way that these case studies are structured is that we first look at the building in the site, and we look at how it relates to the sidewalk, the adjacent buildings, the backyard, how it relates, of course, to the DFE, and importantly, what the lowest floor is, the lowest occupiable floor in relationship to grade and in relationship to the DFE. So I don't have a pointer, but in between the site plan and the neighborhood type, you'll see a list of information that's kind of hard to read, but it brings together zoning and New York City building code conditions that you have to take into account. So we look at construction type, year built, again, if there is space on subgrade, if there's an elevator, just factors that are going to have a big impact on your retrofit strategy. And looking at FAR, floor area ratio, which is important when it comes to replacing lost occupiable floor space. So we can get to that in a different case study. So after we look at the building in the site, we then take the existing conditions and look at, again, the adjacencies, the front yard, rear yard, side yards, and the setbacks, if there are some, in terms of the zoning envelope. So here, under the existing conditions, you see that the zoning envelope is kind of awkward. If you were to elevate your building up to the DFE, you would be able to build an addition onto this building, but it would have to fit within this zoning envelope, which is very awkward. So sometimes if you're losing square footage, you might not be able to replace it because it's just not going to be efficient construction. And just to keep in mind that sometimes retrofitting isn't the most cost-effective mitigation strategy, especially when you have buildings that are in poor condition. It might just be much more cost-effective to rebuild. Just something to keep in mind. And also, I'm just going to jump quickly to this page where we're showing, we've elevated 3 bungalows here because we wanted to illustrate how the streetscape mitigation strategies from zoning can be applied in different ways. So if you're as Dakota explained, if you were elevating your building over a certain height, and here we're elevating it 10 feet, you need to apply 2 streetscape mitigations. So what we have here in this example is we have a stair turn, and plantings. And then in these other ones, we have, since we are accommodating parking below, we could not fit the stair turn, so we added a porch, so that counts as, does the porch count as 2, or, so porch and covered porch is 2. So it's just different ways that you can design the access and streetscape that makes it more vibrant. And also looking at the fact, this is an example illustrates the fact that you can't just elevate your building in place. In order to accommodate the access, since it's 10 feet, you're going to have to move your building back. And that's costly, it's complicated, you need a new foundation. And a lot of elevations, you're going to need a new foundation anyway. So just things to keep in mind. Elevation can be really simple if you have a building that's strong and you have a lot that will accommodate all of the construction necessary. But when you're in a site condition like this, where you have a very narrow lot, it could be quite difficult. And like I said, in the case studies that we've modeled, they're fully compliant with Appendix G and NFIP. So we also wanted to show some alternative strategies, which are if you're not substantially damaged or improved, and you're not necessarily complying with all NFIP regulations, just partial mitigation strategies. We lay out a few different ways that you can retrofit your home to make it resilient without the cost or the time or the other factors that go into making it complicated. So here is another example of a detached typology. This is in Garrettson, and this is a wood frame house with unreinforced masonry foundation. And as you can see from the street view, a lot of buildings in this neighborhood have already elevated, so it's relatively common to do it around here. But the DFE now is quite a bit higher than what it used to be. So when you elevate, just to quickly get through this, it's just keep in mind that it's going to be higher than the DFE here is 13 feet, sidewalk grade is 5 feet, the property grade actually is 2 feet below the sidewalk, so you have a great distance to elevate, and we're actually bumping it up a foot, applying the alternate reference plane rule here from the zoning to accommodate parking below. So just keep in mind that you have this option. If your flood elevation is maybe 6 feet or 5 feet, 6 feet above grade, and you want to accommodate parking below, you can apply the alternate reference plane and bump it up an additional amount of height so you can accommodate the parking below. So here we've just relocated the systems from the cellar. We've filled the cellar. We've completely elevated the home above the DFE, the lowest floor above the DFE, relocated all of the systems to within the home, and then at grade, the plan at grade just shows that we're using that space for parking, access, and storage. For the sake of time, I'm just gonna skip to the next one. Okay, so now we get into the attached typology. So, as you know, New York City has a lot of attached and semi-detached buildings. So that's a shared party wall, shared bearing wall, and that makes it very difficult, if not impossible, to elevate a building. In the manual, we actually look at a few different semi-detached and attached typologies to show the different ways that you can elevate above. You can, remove floor joists and relocate them, but that can be problematic. Or you can, in this example, the zoning envelope shows that you could actually build an addition on top to replace the lost square footage below the DFE. But this is in Canarsie, and this example is different from most of what you're going to see of the attached building typology in that the space below the DFE is not counted towards FAR. It's a garage and a rec room, and if that's the case, you cannot relocate that lost square footage. So that's just something to keep in mind. I don't know if that is going to change in the future, but there might be some people who are going to lose their, rental units. So just going to have to be very careful when you enable people to relocate their square footage to make sure that it actually is part of their FAR. And I have like 1 minute, so I'm just going to touch upon 2 minutes, sorry. Exaggeration. So here is a mixed use example. We're on Van Brunt in Red Hook. And this building is broken up where half of it has commercial on the ground floor and 2 units above, and the other half has it's just 1 residential triplex. And since it is in a residential district with a commercial overlay, they have the option of converting the residential into commercial space and dry floodproofing. And if you convert your residential to commercial, you are able to relocate that square footage that's lost. So what we're showing here is keeping your systems down below and you're enclosing them in a dry floodproof enclosure. Since it's commercial, you can dry floodproof. Converting that ground floor to commercial use and building an addition onto the rear, because it's commercial, you can build out to the property line, and then relocating that lost residential square footage up above on the roof within, because it's the R5 district, it's within the zoning envelope. So this is fully compliant. But just keep in mind that dry floodproofing can be very costly, very, very costly. Hydrostatic forces in an area where you have a high water table are going to demand that you have a lot of reinforcement in your basement, maybe helical piles, maybe a 4-foot slab. So just, you have to engage your engineer and understand what you're getting yourself into. And then just one other thing to note, when you're applying deployable floodgates on your commercial street wall, you have to be sure that your building is strong enough to accept the loads that it takes. FEMA says that you can only do it to 3 feet, but they're sizing that for wood frame construction. So in New York City, we have a lot of masonry construction that can accept these gates that are higher than 3 feet. So just to keep in mind when you're looking at the FEMA guidance that buildings in New York City might fall out of those rules. Okay, stop. That's
thirsty, raise your hand and we will, as a physical exercise, pass the water jugs down. Have them at the end of each row. All right.
All right. So, my name is Emily Rubenstein. I'm with the Mayor's Office of Housing Recovery Operations, otherwise known as the Build It Back program. My presentation is intended to give you some background on the Build It Back process. So there's been a lot of articles in the news, and I'm sure you've heard some perhaps not so great things about our program, how long it's taking people, why have they moved. So I'm going to try to give you some background on our process, how people move through the process, and give you an update on where folks are, broadly speaking, right now. At the help desk events, there will be staff from Build It Back available to look into the system that we use to track applicants. So just, we heard at the very beginning of this presentation about accessing the help desk system to sort of track people and case manage people. These applicants have probably had the same experience of like giving information for maybe their disaster case managers to apply to FEMA money, and then they went through a whole system, putting in their information on that, and then they worked through a whole system with Build It Back and giving us all this information, and now they're going to giving you all this information. So just FYI, another, you may find another level of frustration. Why am I giving this information? But just FYI, I want to take you through the steps of how we've worked with applicants. First off, we've registered applicants. So last summer, we started registration. We had about 20,000 people register. We took documents in. We made sure they met all of our fairly stringent eligibility requirements. They had to provide a lot of documentation and proof. And then we went through all of that information, verified it with third-party sources. We took a look, so that was the review part. We sort of ensured they met our criteria. The assessment involves both going out to an applicant's home and doing the damage assessment. So we have a team of assessors that go out to all of these homes and determine whether or not they're substantially damaged, whether or not they would be a repair applicant or an elevate applicant or a rebuild, et cetera. We also look at their benefits that they've received, their coordination of benefits. Part of our program, while it is a benefit to the applicant, we also do require applicants, if they have received funds, say from FEMA or insurance, et cetera, that they have not yet spent, to basically hand that money over to us, and then we will basically combine those funds with additional funds from HUD to repair, elevate, rebuild, et cetera. So part of our process involves this coordination of benefits process, which can be quite lengthy. Next is the option selection, where the applicant comes in, meets with us. We say, great, you're a repair applicant, and we're going to elevate your utilities, and your transfer amount is X, and you have to write us that check, and then we're going to do your work, and blah, 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 and everybody signs documents. They leave happy, hopefully. Then we go out and do design consultation, go to their home, figure out exactly what the plan is, the scope of work. They have to sign another few agreements, and then we start the construction. So they're giving us a lot of documents. We're making them sign a lot of things. There are several visits to the home. They have to talk to us a lot. So there's a lot of back and forth, and I'm happy to provide more details in the process, but at a very high level, that's our general process. Susan from the program is going to go through this slide in more detail, but I just wanted to provide you on a very, very high level how sort of our determinations based on our assessment. So while applicants can go to the Department of Buildings and submit their documentation to get a receipt of determination regarding substantial damage, for the purposes of Build It Back, our assessors are going to their home and making this determination. So we look at the value of the storm damage, both the work that has been completed and the work that still needs to be done, and we compare that to the pre-storm value of the home, which is the Department of Finance structure value, which is not the amount that the home sold for. It's not the amount that a real estate agent will provide. It is a very specific number that is very hard to find on a DOF website. But if you have any questions about that, we're happy to provide further guidance. And so the key factor is, are you above or below 50%? That 50%, if you're below, you're a repair applicant. If you're above 50%, you're going to be either elevate, repair, or rebuild. And I'm not going to get into the choice right now because we have some flexibility depending on the applicant, but and the conditions of the project. But that, on a very high level, is how we determine which pathway people go on. So these are the 6 pathways. I'm not going to get into relocation or acquisition for redevelopment, but there is basically an opportunity for applicants to more or less get bought out by the city, separate from the state buyout program that's operating currently in several areas in Staten Island. So just an FYI for you all, so we actually, it was 26,000 registrants. These are all the different parts of the city that registered with us, just so you can get a sense. You may want to sort of familiarize yourself with some of these neighborhoods as you start going to them. In terms of our reporting to date, so we have completed approximately 10,000 damage assessments, so we've gone to about 10,000 applicants' homes. That means we still have about probably, because a lot of people have withdrawn from the program or they've been unresponsive, more like 6,000-ish damage assessments to complete. So in some cases, we may not know a given applicant's pathway at this point, but we do know a lot of them. We've distributed about 500 reimbursement checks. We've made about 177 construction starts. We have, and that's broken down into 173 repairs, but in total we have 277 scheduled. We only have 1 Elevate applicant that has started, 4 scheduled. There are 3 rebuilds that have construction starts, and we've completed 46. So that is the extent of my piece. Any questions about the Build It Back place?
Build It Back is the city or through FEMA paying for the whole repair?
Sure, this is a good question. I should
It's a basic question.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I should have backed up. So the City of New York is administering the Build It Back program, which is the program through which we are distributing the federal housing urban development, community development block grant funds, so CDBG, disaster recovery, DR funding. So this is federal dollars that the city is administering and distributing to approximately 20,000 applicants to Build It Back. And so we're distributing those funds either through the benefit of a construction or through reimbursement check, or in some cases acquisition. Yeah.
I just want to clarify, the process and the options you just talked about are specific to the single-family program.
Thank you. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So this was focused on the single-family program. We do have a multifamily program, which I didn't provide the numbers for, but the vast majority of our applicants are in the single-family program, but that is absolutely correct. And the multifamily program is being administered through the housing, through HPD.
I'll just say the single family is 1 to 4 family homes.
Oh, thank you.
So it's not just, it's 1 to 4 family homes. So.
Yeah, anything 5 and over is considered multifamily.
And just also to clarify, unless you work for the Housing Recovery Office, you're not expected to give people advice on anything about Build It Back, not on the program requirements, not on the pathways, not on the status of their application. That's why we're going to have somebody from Build It Back there. Most of the people that have come to the past help desks have been people who were not eligible for Build It Back because they didn't meet the basic threshold criteria to get into this program. So it's important that all of us understand what the program is and does, because the people sitting in the client chair know more about Build It Back than I, as a technical assistance provider, will ever know. They're going to be firing this terminology at us, and we just want to be able to look at them with something other than glazed eyes and say, go over there and talk to that person.
Yeah, and thank you. I would just say also, I mean, the staff from Build It Back will be able to provide applicants with an update about, oh, okay, we did your damage assessment, we determined that you were substantially damaged, and your next step will be X or Y. So if you come across a build-it-back applicant, you should ask them, have you had a damage assessment? Do you know where you are in the process? Because that will tell you a lot about how far along they are, and a lot of applicants don't want to be elevated. So we're finding people that either they don't want to be elevated and they're withdrawing, or they don't want to elevate and they're contesting their substantial damage calculation, or they don't like, having stairs for their property or whatever it is. There are a lot of people that are basically contesting the determinations that we've made, and to the extent that, you run into those, or to the extent that you think you can help sort of facilitate that discussion, by all means feel free to provide that feedback. But in a lot of cases, folks may be coming to you because they may not like the answer that they've heard from us. So just to make you aware of that. And also our website, if you want to familiarize yourself with it, I'm supposed to stop, but nyc.gov/recovery, if you want to look at the website.
I think I'm the second to last speaker, so we'll try to make this efficient. So my name is Susan Rosenstadt. I am an architect with the Housing Recovery Office, and my role has been pretty much to work with many other people to determine what the program standards are for the Build It Back program. We work closely with city planning, we work closely with the Department of Buildings, we work closely with Housing Preservation and Development in both determining and implementing the requirements for the Build It Back program. I'm not going to read most of this text, but basically the Build It Back program is to determine what is, the program standards are to determine what is and is not eligible under the requirements that we are subject to, i.e. the HUD requirements, the DOB requirements, and we are also subject through HUD to certain green resiliency methods, enterprise green community, and the green retrofit checklist for non-substantially damaged homes. We comply with all codes. We never supersede anyone's code, New York City, New York State, federal regulations. And we try very hard to achieve consistency throughout all our rehabilitation activities. And this kind of informs many of our decisions where we would like to help one person in a way that might really be the right thing to do. We always have to look at how this is going to be applied across the board. Please realize that everyone knows what their neighbor is getting and doing and has asked for, so we have to be really careful about how we manage the program to ensure that everyone gets kind of fair and equal treatment. As Emily said, we send out in the beginning damage assessors to look at the homes and determine whether the home is more or less than 50% of the home's pre-storm value. The damage is greater than that. If the damage is greater than 50% of the pre-storm value, the house is considered substantially damaged and must be elevated. If it's less, the house is not substantially damaged at that point. However, we do two calculations, the substantial damage and the substantial improvement. And the substantial improvement takes into account everything that we're going to do. The substantial damage basically restores the house to its pre-storm condition. The substantial improvement looks at everything we're doing to kind of fix that pre-storm damage and improve the house, whether it's green, whether it's just adding space, whatever that whether it's life safety issues. Either of those numbers, if either of those numbers is over 50%, the house is considered substantially damaged and must be elevated. And as everyone said, we look at the Department of Finance 2012 tax years to make our determination of the pre-storm value. We only rehabilitate conditions that are related to storm damage, our life safety issues. We try not to take on deferred maintenance as best we can. We understand there's a lot of deferred maintenance out there, but we have limited funds and our mandate is really to repair the storm damage. So if we're repairing storm damage and your roof is leaking, we will not put money in and then leave it subject to more damage. So we will repair items to protect the investment of the city in your home, but it's really primarily to repair storm damage. Homes are all primary residences. And other than a section of choose your own contractor, the city has hired contractors to perform the work. So we've determined all the materials they use, we've determined the standards that they build by, the specifications. So there really are no exceptions. The homeowner can provide any toilets or sinks or light fixtures under any program except the choose your own contractor program. They do have limited choices. We believe that they could really come up with some very nice alternatives. We have choices in kitchen and bath, cabinets, fixtures, appliances, tile, carpeting, flooring, doors, roofing, and exterior paint colors. So when the design consultation takes place, if the homeowner is having a repair to one of these areas, they will get a booklet and they can make their choices as to what cabinets they want, what appliances they want, what flooring, and things like that, to really kind of, we have software that does kind of on-the-spot 3D design. It's a version of Chief Architect that our design consultants use in the field to let people see what they'll be getting. There are certain things we don't do, and these are pretty much mandated by HUD and by FEMA. It has to be attached. We don't do detached structures, we don't do sheds, garages, decks, porches, hot tubs. We don't do boat ramps, we don't do docks, we don't do seawalls. We do not replace washers and dryers. Although if you have an electrical connection, we will make sure that that's adequate and working. We don't replace those appliances. We have a mandate of 1 kitchen per dwelling unit. Many people have outfitted part of their home for their child or for a unit which they may use for additional income. The Build-A-Back program will only repair and rebuild legal documented units. So if people had a second kitchen somewhere that was not a legal documented unit, we will not rebuild it. And that does sometimes cause some angst among, especially when it comes to elevations, because people are losing space that was income producing, and we understand that, but you know, the city is really very firm, especially in non-substantially damaged homes, that they don't want people living in substandard conditions where they really could be subject to danger should another flood come. So we don't do landscaping except under limited conditions where it's required for a mitigation or for enterprise green communities. We will try to elevate utilities in non-substantially damaged homes, even though we're not elevating the home. Where it's feasible, we do it to the first floor, we can do it to the attic. Many people do not want to do it because many homes are very small and they just don't want to lose the space. We will try, however, to say just elevate their electrical panel and provide a disconnect to any power remaining in the flood zone, so at least they could shut that power off and keep power if their power stays on in the event of a storm. When we go in, we look for critical life safety issues. Those we will address right away. We also look for unsafe wiring. We put in smoke and carbon monoxide detectors in every home, in every room that's required. They'll be battery operated in non-substantially damaged homes. They'll be hardwired in substantially damaged homes. We will not legalize or repair to meet legal requirements spaces which have been modified by the homeowner, which do not comply with the required New York City minimum housing standards. If they have an open permit, they have to stop construction, and in many cases they have to close outstanding open permits before we can go in. This also causes problems because people started work and completed work and no one ever closed the permit. It's an issue that we try to deal with as best we can, but we, especially in an elevation, we often have to figure out how to close those permits, or the homeowner has to figure it out. Again, we're just in compliance with all required codes. For substantially damaged homes, when we're elevating, we kind of retrofit to be compliant. Non-substantially damaged homes, the areas we're working on will be made compliant. A lot of this is, you know, we'll clean up your inside, we'll clean up the outside. We do mitigate for lead, asbestos, and mold in all homes, so we're putting money in. We do, for lead and asbestos, a report is done as part of the Tier 2, and our contractors will go in and take care of any required abatement or mitigation. One of our most controversial topics are basements and cellars. I know Joe Ackroyd went into this a little in the beginning. A cellar is more than half below grade, a basement is more than half above grade. A habitable basement one or two family home complies with all the requirements of the housing maintenance codes for rooms which are not located in the basement. And that includes light, air, sanitation, egress, except that in a basement, your ceiling height can be 7 feet. So the Build It Back program, and this is just half below grade, cellar is more than half below, basement's more than half above. There were enough professionals in here to kind of gloss over this. Cellar, no room in a cellar can be occupied, and we do not repair cellars, basically except for mechanical equipment. We clean them out, we empty them out, take care of any required electrical or mechanical equipment, and leave it be. A basement apartment, we will, if it's a legal documented basement apartment, we will rebuild it, bathroom, kitchens, and everything that goes into it. If it's habitable space, and as we spoke of, that meets the standards of the minimum housing code, we do not rebuild kitchens or bathrooms, but we will rebuild the walls, we will put in flooring, we will put in basic electric and light fixtures so that homeowners can kind of use the space again when we're...
Susan, can I
Sure.
for clarification, this is all true for the repair program?
Yes, I work for the repair program,
Right.
which is...
How do those three things change for elevation?
The cellar does not change, for elevation,
For elevation, okay. Elevation, we're filling in the cellar, in the basement, but will we rebuild the
yes, and we will get to that. A habitable basement apartment, yes, we will rebuild, and the housing maintenance code just contains all these items. I'm not going to go into any, but those are the things we look for when we look at basements. Again, more than half above grade, more than half below grade. This is, the reason there are a lot of slides is this topic I go over and over, and we still have, a lot of confusion with people out there. Habitable basement, the windows have to be 12 square feet, depending on whether you're looking at 1968 code or 2008 code. It's either one window or all the windows, but you have to have sufficient lighting to be a habitable basement. If it's a little window like that, it's not going to be considered a habitable space. We don't repair the cellars, the base apartments, we will repair. Non-habitable basements are like cellars, we'll just clean them out, make sure your electrical and mechanical is safe, and move on. Habitable basements, we'll do basic repair. I want to get to elevations. Walkout basements is our newest heading here, but we do, and we've determined that it counts as a basement back to the point where it becomes a cellar, and so we will go clean it out and rebuild the walls. And we have 20,000 individuals out there, and everyone has an opinion. So we work very hard at trying to come up with compromises that satisfy the most people possible. Not too many, but as many as possible.
So walkout cellars are actually being considered basements?
Yes, are half considered basements, till the point when they become way below grade, but yes, they are. If you have doors, you can get out of in the rear, because they do meet the light and air. Again, briefly, green building requirements. HUD requires us to comply for non-substantially damaged homes with the green building retrofit checklist. For substantially damaged homes, we comply with enterprise green community, but because we're retrofitting to the extent possible. But we use Energy Star appliances, we use water conserving fixtures. If we're replacing a roof, we put radiant energy barriers. We use low VOC paints, mold prevention surfaces, some duct sealing, and there's a whole other slew of requirements, but those are the major ones. As I said before, we do take care of asbestos, lead, and mold, and for mold we will try to not only abate the mold, but take care of the causes of the mold, usually some kind of water infiltration. We deal with environmental compliance. We deal with houses that are in wetlands. We work very closely with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. There's a whole new slew of regulations if your house is adjacent to or in a tidal or freshwater wetland. And depending on the scope of work, it can require anything from being within a New York City general permit, which is not that long a delay, to requiring a permit, which could take 8 months or more if we're elevating a house in a wetland. So those are things which can certainly lead to a longer lead time. We don't take care of bulkheads, and we don't take care of sinkholes unless the sinkhole is affecting the structural stability of a home, but those are not things the program can handle. Accessibility, if the homeowner has a medical condition, they can request accessibility, certain accommodations. We only provide accommodations in areas being repaired. We do not go in and rebuild homes to be accessible. the program just doesn't have the funds or the mandate to take that on or the expense. There are certain things that everyone can have, lever handles and grab bars, certain things, the lift, we try for ramps if we can't, the lifts, and other kinds of construction needs a doctor's note in the beginning of the program. Elevated homes, if they're substantially damaged, they have to be elevated. While many homeowners who converted basements or cellars to additional apartments, either rental or occupied, only those units documented in the New York City records will be eligible for program benefits. If it's not in the flood zone, it will not be elevated either. If it's in the X zone, we'll do our repairs, but we do not elevate the home. There's nowhere to kind of elevate it to. If it contains a legal apartment in the basement, that apartment will be recreated. If it means, and it may mean in many cases, there's usually two options, both of which neither one we've achieved yet, but we're working through. One is to elevate the house and build a story on top. The second is, in some cases where we have townhouses, the first floor is high enough, the first occupiable floor is high enough to abandon the ground floor and then try to build on top. We understand that these are going to be complicated issues and probably do not exempt us from some of the waivers that are permitted under the zoning text amendment for elevating non-compliant houses, and many of our houses are non-compliant in side yards and rear yards and front yards. So these are going to be issues which are going to take time and we are going to have to work through. Again, we've spoken now many times, so I don't really, not going to go through this. When you elevate, you fill in the cellars and the space below is storage access or parking. In our case, thank you, homes being elevated up to 4 feet will generally have closed foundations that will be wet flood proof. If they're over 4 feet, they're just going to be open foundations. If we can't recreate parking that was there before, we will use the parking waiver to try to get parking on the site for those people. If we're elevating at least 6 feet, we are working with city planning, with that, and with Dakota on the issues that we face. It's been more difficult to achieve some of the required mitigations than I think maybe we anticipated, because our sites are so small and it's hard to get a switchback stair and you can't get much landscaping, you can't get a deck across much of it. But we are working with city planning to achieve the required mitigations, which we fully expect to comply with. So that's an issue that we take on with every home elevation. We elevate your mechanicals. Oil tanks are probably the only thing we probably can't elevate, and we'll have to figure out a way to safely anchor those, but all other mechanicals will be placed either on a floor in the home, in the attic, or in a small addition out the back. Homeowners do have to relocate. That does become an issue. They have to relocate for up to 3 months, and we do not provide either funds or a location for them to relocate to. So that is something that comes up for frequent discussion with our people. And people have managed to, the elevation schedules, people have managed to find family or whatever, but it is traumatic for some people with pets, whatever. The program does provide the FEMA elevation certificate at the end, so for sure, insurance purposes, we will make sure that you have what you need for your insurance. And certain conditions can delay the delivery of a home. Again, as we saw, wetlands, attached homes, homes on some of the courts in Sheepshead Bay. We're still working through with DOB when you don't have a street at all, when your houses are in a map street, when your house is partially over water. These are all issues which we are encountering and are just working through as we come to them. As we said briefly, we've really targeted this at 1 to 4 family, but it's really aimed at 1 to 2 family, because in New York City, even though we're 1 to 4 family, 3 and 4 family are considered multifamily under New York State law. So our architects it's a much more complicated topic because there's all different kinds of multifamilies, old law, new law. So we just need our architects to be compliant and knowledgeable. Again, we've been to the NFIP. The only thing I would say is that in a basement, and this will be my last subject, but people have to take, people have to take flood insurance for every dollar we put in. But in a basement, most of the work other than critical mechanical systems is not covered. So you can see on this what's covered. Some pumps, oil tanks, pumps, furnaces, unfinished, unfloated, untaped drywall and ceilings, So even though people want their basements built back, for every dollar we put in, they're gonna have to pay flood insurance, and they're not gonna get money back for those, even if it's a legal apartment that we're not elevating, if there's another flood. So we really have tried to find a fine line between doing as much as we can for people and not subjecting them to conditions which might put them into a state of hardship, you know, just by satisfying them in the short term. So that's it. Thank you.
Susan, where's that house?
In the Jersey. So I just took a picture the other day, and it was kind of so.
Okay. So we are the last speakers, and I promise it'll be very quick. I don't think we'll even need Joan's little warning prompts. Hopefully the air will help me out too. So I'm Sarah Martin. I'm from the Center for New York City Neighborhoods. We're one of the HelpDesk planners. And this is Ziska Anderson from NILAG, New York Legal Assistance Group, and NILAG is one of our partners. So Michelle and Kristen mentioned earlier that we will have housing counselors and legal assistance providers on site. And I just wanted to give you a better idea of what they'll be doing there, so you know when to direct homeowners and you have a better idea of the services that we offer. So just so you understand what the center is, we're a network of 37 housing counseling and legal services providers. Since Sandy, we've been working with 27 different groups working on Sandy recovery and the impacted areas. So on site at the help desk, we'll have housing counselors, we'll have attorneys, flood insurance experts, and other advocates. And they can help with different kinds of mortgage issues, loan modifications, forbearance issues, all kinds of insurance issues. They'll have the tool that Caroline showed you, the flood insurance website, and the mapping tool to use. They can also give other kinds of legal advice about insurance, FEMA, SBA issues. They can do budgeting and financial analysis, try to analyze affordability for homeowners. They can help homeowners connect to different recovery services and funds. And Kristen will be sending out a more detailed list of all of the services that will be provided, and feel free if you're a volunteer to, if something comes up, to ask one of the counselors or attorneys on site. Also, most of our partners have offices in these communities where the help desk will be, so they can provide follow-up. And yeah, so Ziska's going to talk a little bit about our Build It Back counseling program, which some of our partners are a part of, and it's internal to Build It Back. We help applicants who have different kinds of issues that are preventing them from getting through the process and getting the award, try to straighten out those issues so that they, you know, can have their homes repaired or rebuilt.
Thank you. So, as Sarah explained, the Build It Back program offers free counseling to the homeowners who are going through the program. And NILAG is one of the legal counseling organizations that are working with homeowners to try and resolve some of these issues that are emerging as they go through the program. So just to give you some background on NILAG, NILAG is a nonprofit organization that provides free civil legal services. And after Sandy, we mobilized a disaster relief program to help victims deal with the storm and all the issues ranging from foreclosures, insurance issues, just basic disaster relief from FEMA, other organizations, nonprofit organizations like Catholic Charities, Red Cross. So we were very involved with the recovery process immediately after the storm, and we continue to do work with the recovery. So NILAG has a storm response unit that currently consists of about 25 staff, attorneys, paralegals. We have financial counselors. We are assisting clients in New York City and in Long Island. And so far, we've handled more than 9,000 cases. And as of I have stats up to April 29, 2014. We have assisted with a little over 40 million in total direct dollars achieved for Sandy victims. So that's in payments and savings to clients. As far as the Build It Back program, our role as legal counselors is to help the applicant move through the process. So we try to collaborate with all the other vendors within the Build It Back program to try and resolve issues that are emerging for the homeowners. And some of those issues include delinquent mortgage, distress issues, foreclosures that are active that may be preventing a homeowner from moving forward in the program. It limits what a homeowner can receive, what type of assistance they can receive from the Build It Back program. But we try and work on resolutions such as loan modifications. Sometimes we are allowed under different funding to actually assist the homeowner in litigation to try and come up with some form of solution that will allow them to move forward. We are assisting with SBA loan cancellation. That's one of the biggest issues that we are seeing with the Build It Back applicants. We are also dealing with release of insurance funds issues. So when it comes time to pay over that transfer amount to Build It Back, some of that money is being held by the homeowner's bank. So we're assisting with releasing funds to the city. Another vast amount of issues that we're seeing has to do with the coordination of benefits. So under that we have pretty much the F13 documenting allowable expenses that a homeowner can get credit for, with the aim of lowering transfer amount or for reimbursement in certain situations. We are dealing with issues like ownership, title issues. A lot of that has been coming up with homeowners. And to help facilitate homeowners' access to the legal counseling program, CNYCN has implemented a pilot program where each Build It Back site is outfitted with a legal help desk. So different from Sandy Help Desk, this is a legal help desk. So at the Kia in Staten Island, Fort Tilden in Queens, so far we have these help desks where it's staffed by an attorney that can answer various legal questions that may come up during one of, let's say, the options review meetings that are going on at the site, or a homeowner may be able to walk in off the street with a legal question and the help desk would be available to them. And the help desk is equipped to answer simple questions and more legal, complex legal questions. So we can either answer those questions on the spot or it may require follow-up. The legal help desk is available every day. So pretty much from Mondays, 2 p.m. to 7 p.m., Tuesdays through Fridays from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. and on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. So we're pretty much involved, and as stated earlier on at the Sandy Help Desk, NILAG will have attorneys on site who will be assisting with various issues similar to the issues that the Build It Back applicants are experiencing. So the people who would be coming to the Sandy Help Desk may not necessarily be Build It Back applicants, but they might be facing similar issues. I can definitely see foreclosure issues coming up. So we will have attorneys on site to assist with those questions. Thank you.
It seems like we have a little time for some questions and answers. If you guys want to raise your hands and ask some questions, we can field them out to the various presenters. Go ahead.
I have a building code question and a time, a quick zoning question. That house in particular, if it's located in the borough of Brooklyn or Queens or across Staten Island, it's a two-story home. And when you elevate it as per building code, it'd be a 3-story home.